Welcome everybody. Today it's this Digital Frontiers Institute webinar, and we're partnering with FinEquity to deliver today's call, along with having special guests from WomenSave and Lucy. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Corley. I'm Divisional Director at Digital Frontiers, and it's my pleasure to run our DFI's webinar series, something I was finding incredibly enjoyable as well as informative. So I really hope that you all enjoy today's webinar too. I'm delighted that today we're having a focus on women's financial inclusion, and not just talking about why, because I think, quite frankly, and hopefully my panelists would agree, we're beyond the conversation about talking about why, but moving into the conversation about talking about how. And we've got some great case studies of some really wonderful products and services out there that are catering to include all women in a digital finance space. And I'm really hoping that you'll be able to, with me, learn from them and to really think about how we can design specifically to include women. I have the wonderful job of not doing too much moderating today because I'm co-moderating with the wonderful Katie from FinEquity. So just the last thing I do before I hand over to Katie is just to remind you all that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you do have any internet connectivity challenges, but most importantly, you really enjoy today's session, you'll be getting a link that you can share the recording to your colleagues and peers. So please do help us get this knowledge and information out there. And also to remind you that we want to hear your questions. We've specifically got time towards the end of the webinar to ask the panelists your questions. So you'll find a Q&A function in the bottom of your screen. And I would really ask that you type your questions there to help myself and Katie be able to make sure that we cover as many of your questions as possible on today's webinar. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Katie. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really a thrill to be here with you all. My name is Katie Hyatt, and I'm the Digitally Enabled Financial Inclusion Lead from FinEquity. I think some of you will be familiar with FinEquity. It's a community of practice focused on women's financial inclusion, housed at CGAP within the World Bank Group. Within FinEquity, we have three working themes, three work streams. So I lead the Digitally Enabled Financial Inclusion work stream. We also have a work stream focused on gender transformation around social norms. And then we have a final work stream on impact pathways. I'm just going to do a small plug and drop in the chat a link to sign up for our member list. Completely free, it's open to everyone. We're currently 4,200 people globally across 141 countries and 1,000 institutions. So there's an absolute pool of knowledge in there and some people sharing some really interesting work. So today's webinar is about design and how informed design is crucial for women's financial inclusion. Traditionally, design has been, financial products have been designed by men, specifically for men, and then deployed to everyone with the hope that women will pick up, might resonate with women will pick them up and run with them, adopt them. However, we know this is just not true. We see the pervasive gender gap and account ownership not budging. However, we do have new Findex data coming out this month, so we're ever hopeful that that will move. But what we do see is a real need for intentional design when it comes to women's financial services. And we've been working on this at FinEquity through a series of case studies, two of whom you'll hear from shortly. But before I move on to introducing our panelists, I wanted to do a quick plug for a resource guide. We have a series of resource guides that will soon be launched at FinEquity. A curated list of specialized tools and guidance from our community members around three key areas, one of which is gender intelligent design rather. So please do keep an eye out for that over the summer. We'll certainly be sending it to all of our members. as it is launched. So for today's webinar, I would first like to introduce Marie Mentelucci. And Marie is the founder of WomenSave. WomenSave is a nonprofit which is focused on expanding financial services to women, currently focused on West Uganda, looking at expanding these services through goal-based savings. So we'll hear from Marie, and then we'll move over to Debbie Watkins. And Debbie is the co-founder and CEO of Lucy, which is a mobile app based in Singapore, focused on improving women's access to women's ability to save and spend and budget. And Debbie will be talking about Lucy, one of Lucy's focus areas of the remittance corridor between Singapore and the Philippines, and how, specifically the benefit of this or the focus of this, but for foreign domestic workers in Singapore. Without any more preamble, I would love to turn it over to Marie, and she will tell you a little bit about WomenSave's work. We'll then move to Debbie, and then I have a number of questions for Debbie and Lucy before we move over to your questions. Please don't be a stranger in the chat. Send your questions through the Q&A function, and look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you, Katie. And I'm going to share my slides now just to keep myself on track. Did that work? Great. Well, thank you again, and thank you to DFI and FinEquity for the opportunity today. Like Katie said, my name is Marie Mentelucci, and I am the Executive Director of WomenSave. Our mission, broadly speaking, is to empower unbanked women to meet their own financial goals. And we do that with personalized goal-based savings plans and access to mobile money. The problem that we're trying to address is that women living in poverty often do not have the agency to define their own financial goals, much less the ability to meet them on their own terms and conditions. So the end result is that women living in poverty, especially in developing economies, often find themselves unable to respond to predictable life events like sending a child to school, much less an emergency like if a family member falls ill. We started to try and tackle this problem by looking at research. And we started kind of with a global perspective, looking some of the very exciting behavioral science that's taking place today. There are a lot of really interesting studies out of Innovations for Poverty Action in particular. Countries like the Philippines, Kenya, Malawi come to mind, some really interesting studies done around savings behavior there. And one of the main findings that was relevant to us in our work is that people seem much more likely to save if it's for a very specific goal. Beyond that, it helps if they set aside money on a regular basis, even if it's a very small amount, and if the money is kept out of reach. So those studies were kind of in the background informing our work. In addition, we looked at some research largely out of Women's World Banking that corroborates that women are inherent savers. I think in large part because it's a lot less risky to enter the formal financial system via savings than loans, for example. It seems much more accessible and approachable, if you will. So with those two main kind of global findings in the background from a very broad literature review, we then moved on to conduct our own market research in Uganda. Why Uganda? We had a pre-existing relationship there thanks to our fiscal sponsor at the time, Global Partners for Development. And we conducted our research, which found that there was in fact a demand, and we looked particularly amongst women for our research. There was a demand for these goal-based, what we call commitment savings plans. And beyond that, we also, the market research revealed an interest in something that we hadn't totally anticipated, but an individual emergency fund that allows clients to simultaneously set aside small sums of money for those unforeseen economic shocks, at the same time being able to save for a more exciting goal that they have selected. So this was our complementary market research that then informed our signature suite of products and services that we designed. I want to note first off that these are all offered by what we call savings officers, who are local women with business degrees and skills. And it's really important to us that our services be offered by women for women. So I just want to state that at the outset. In terms of the products and services we offer, we start with financial literacy training. This is typically offered in a group setting and often will kind of piggyback off of existing savings groups. Sometimes COVID has something to say about it and we're not able to offer this in a group setting, but for the most part, that's the intention. Followed up with a one-on-one financial advisory meeting. This is something that the savings officer does with each individual client to establish an average monthly budget, and from there, an ability to save. They discuss a specific financial goal that the client is at complete discretion to select on her own. And then the savings officer helps to design a savings plan for that goal. At the same time, she designs a personalized individual emergency fund that's commensurate with the client's average monthly expenses. So at the same time, each client is saving for these two personalized savings plans. The most popular goals I might note in terms of the commitment goals typically have to do with livestock, education, and consumer goods. We are finding more interest also in some home improvement goals, as well as business investment and health. Once the plans are in place, the savings officers send regular weekly deposit reminders via SMS text and congratulatory messages at major milestones like the halfway mark. All of this is made possible with access to mobile money. And I'd like to note here that WomenSave itself does not develop the technology, nor are we licensed as a financial service provider, but rather we very much see ourselves as the bridge between the existing technology, which for anyone who's familiar with East African context knows that there is a lot of mobile money services that already exist, and then this unbanked market segment. And our role, as we see it, is to connect those dots in a sustainable way. Lastly, in terms of results to date, Katie mentioned that we are active in Western Uganda, where we conducted a pilot project in 2020. March 2020, no less, was the month and year of all months and years that we had chosen for our pilot project. Nevertheless, it has been quite successful to date. We, at the moment, have just shy of 1,300 active clients who we have empowered to meet over 1,165 financial goals. Like I mentioned, these often have to do with livestock and education and so forth. And importantly, we have, in a 2-year time span, helped those clients more than double their individual emergency reserve funds. So we're really proud of what we've been able to do to date, both in terms of advancing female financial agency and resilience with our products and services. And I think I will go ahead and pause there and pass it back to Katie and Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. That was really fantastic overview. Without wasting any further time, I will hand the mic over to Debbie before we circle back to Marie and Debbie for some conversation.
Great, thank you. Can you see my slide? Fantastic. Well, fantastic to see such a huge turnout, I must admit, and judging by the chat that's coming in as well from literally all over the place. And I think it's kind of very reassuring to see that there's so much sort of strong interest and support in actually supporting women's financial empowerment. So hi to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Debbie Watkins. As Katie mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lucy. And Lucy is a neobank that's been designed from the ground up to enable entrepreneurial women to become unstoppable. And our definition really here of entrepreneurial women is very loosely been defined as women who want to start or grow their businesses. And that has been also recognizing that there are quite a number of women who actually haven't started yet, but have a dream or have an aim that one day they will be able to start their own small business. So one thing that I guess you may be asking as well is why Singapore? Because I think there's also a popular misconception that Singapore is awash in financial services, and that there couldn't possibly be any underserved populations here. But one thing that we discovered when we started out was that there were a number of very distinct groups that were really not getting adequate and relevant access to the financial services they need. And so we decided that we would actually start in Singapore as the first step of what we're planning to do in sort of our expansion in the coming years into Southeast Asia and then beyond, and actually look at different groups of women and understand what their really unique problems were. And the first group that we really focused on, and which was the case study here, was foreign domestic workers. Now, Singapore is not unique, but certainly the sort of prevalence and the number of foreign domestic workers in Singapore compared to many other countries is really very significant. There are about 250,000 and counting women who have left their families behind in search of a better future. And the way I always like to say this is that it takes a certain kind of woman that's prepared to leave her children behind to travel overseas to look after your children. And I think that kind of really makes the point, is that foreign domestic workers are doing this for a reason. And the reason being that really that there's little or no formal employment in their home country. And their aim is ultimately to save enough that they can go back home and start their own small business. And so a very large percentage of helpers really have this dream that they would be able to save enough money and to go back home and to ultimately start their own small business. What actually happens is that the expectation really often doesn't meet the reality. And they're kind of faced with a number of challenges almost from the beginning, a combination of having to borrow money to actually get the placement and to travel to Singapore in the first place through sometimes some quite unscrupulous agents. But often as well that they're living in the home of their employer, which creates a quite unusual dynamic of being partly family, but still an employee, working very long days, technically supposed to have one day off a week, but it often doesn't happen. And one day a month is not unusual. And then combined with that, the sort of what is often quite a lot of pressure from the family to keep sending money home, together with a lack of real control over what happens with their money when it gets back home as well. And on top of that, although they actually do have the ability to open a bank account in Singapore, then it's not on the same terms as you and I would get. It's actually worse. And I think we've probably all heard this before as well, is that if I open an account with the same bank, I get better terms than the helper. And so it's sort of being penalized from all sides. Formal credit is pretty much non-existent as well. Many places that helpers are coming from sort of have cyclones and other shocks that actually they're ill prepared to deal with. And as a result of this, 60% on average of foreign domestic workers actually return home with nothing to show for it. And so we recognized that there was a real gap to fill here. And so our approach, which is what has been our approach with Lucy from the very beginning, was to take a very customer-centric approach and actually look and really understand the lives of helpers and the day-to-day challenges that they were having in managing their money. And so we kind of used the value proposition diagram, which some of you may be familiar with, which really starts understanding the customer, which is the circle on the left-hand side, addressing kind of what their pain points were and their aspirations, and then designing products that actually specifically address these pain points and help them to achieve their aspirations. We also recognized that being an app and being digital meant as well that we did have to make the user interface pleasant, easy to use and intuitive. And so we spend a lot of time as well focusing on that side of things. And so what we really wanted to do was to combine very tailored products that actually really addressed actual real needs and a very pleasant and easy to use user interface. What we came up with was a suite of different products, of which we're implementing, we've implemented the financial services at the top, and the two at the bottom are a work in progress over the next few months. We recognized that the whole dynamic, if you like, with financial services when you're living with your employer can actually make needing money in a hurry something of an awkward conversation. We also found that if a helper needed an advance because of an emergency back home, they of course felt very awkward about asking for it. And it was quite difficult sometimes for the employer to actually remember that they'd given the advance and then remember that they've got to deduct it from the salary at the end of the month. And then remembering, did I do that or didn't I do it? And having yet another awkward conversation. And it was very much this unique power dynamic. But in addition to that, because of the little time, free time that most helpers have, things like sending money home, which is of course so vital to their family, was something that was very challenging and took a lot of their time. Because one key example here being that a lot of the family members of foreign domestic workers are unbanked. They can't really send back through formal banking channels, especially not at low amounts. And taking the time to go to some of the over-the-counter remittance agents was also extremely time-consuming, particularly given that all helpers pretty much their day off is a Sunday, and so Sunday tends to be queuing at the remittance agent day. And it's not unusual for a helper to spend upwards of 3 hours of their day traveling to an agent, standing in a queue at the agent, paying more than they need to at an agent, and then traveling home again. And so we decided that the approach we'd really take was, first of all, in convenience and saving money as well, by enabling helpers to actually send back to some of the most widely used cash agents directly from their phone 24/7, but also combining this with earned wage access as well, which enables helpers to get access to the salary that they've earned so far, even if they're mid-month. Without having any awkward conversations, they can just actually choose to draw down up to the number of days that they've earned so far, which technically, of course, is not a loan because they've already earned this money. And what we've actually done within the app as well is built this so that the amount that they've earned so far during the month is automatically calculated. The amount that they then choose to draw down is recorded, so it's extremely clear to both parties because the employer is also seeing this information. And that when the salary is automatically paid through Lucy at the end of the month, that any advances are automatically deducted at source. So there's no confusion, there's no lack of transparency, there are no disputes, there are no awkward conversations. One other thing that we did was recognized the similar situation to what Marie was explaining as well, is that, of course, the aim of the helper is to save and to save for the future, but short-term things as well as long-term things. And so one of the things that we've done within the app too is to set up named savings pockets, each of which can have a goal associated with it, which could be something like their daughter's school fees, or could be something more sort of longer term and larger, like their business when they go back home. What we're also now doing, again, as a direct recognition of the ultimate aim of the helper, which is to go back home and start their own small business. We've actually been conducting business model canvas workshops for helpers as well, to help them to be more thoughtful and strategic and to plan for what kind of business they actually want to start when they go back home and why. And what's been very interesting as a result of a lot of these conversations is that we've seen as well that many helpers actually have already started a small business back home that their sister's running or something like that. And in a number of cases, it's failed. And in quite a number of those cases, they're not actually really quite sure why it failed. And so this kind of the whole e-training and the forum side of things, which is the area that we're working on building right now, is really with the aim of, say, not just sort of helping to manage the finance service, bridge the gap between what we are offering and what they're sort of getting right now and what we're getting for the same thing, but to really empower them in achieving their going forwards.
Thanks so much, Debbie. And I've just put the case studies in the chat for both WomenSave and Lucy, so you can get further detail from reading these case studies. But I'm mindful of time and some of the great questions coming in. A few questions I'd like to ask both Debbie and Marie, just as we sort of get going. Both WomenSave and Lucy are quite new, and obviously this sort of your evidence base is emerging and developing month on month, which is, you know, I think we're super excited to follow your progress. But thinking about these early months, what have been some sort of initial indicators of success or things that you have been able to see from the sort of the early emerging data and findings? Maybe we'll start with you, Marie.
Great. In short, we were pretty blown away by the fact that we were even able to conduct our pilot, given, like I said, that we launched in March 2020. With the background of the global pandemic unfolding, we thought we would probably have to press pause or just close up shop altogether. On the contrary, we found what seemed to be that our clients, who are women living at or below $2 a day in rural, remote parts of Western Uganda, needed our services then more than ever. And some of the ways we knew this was, so we launched in March 2020. By April, almost all clients had their individual personalized savings plans up and running. 99% were making weekly deposits via mobile money. Within the time frame of our pilot project, which concluded in November of that year, 78% had met their goals that they defined for themselves on time. And this is essentially in the absence of a lot of revenue, given the lockdowns related to COVID. So we were really proud of those early results. Oh, and lastly, that on average during that same time frame, they saved about $35 US. I know everyone's working in different currencies, but hopefully that means something to some people.
Thank you. And Debbie, any early sort of?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was to see whether people actually sort of increase their usage over time, because as an app, we don't have face-to-face engagement. And so, you know, the kind of biggest indicator of value is that people find out about it, they sign up, they start using it, and then they start using it more. And what we've seen is some kind of interesting patterns coming out. First of all, that we have seen more women taking advantage of the earned wage access and the flexibility that that gives. And we have actually now been seeing that sort of our average transactions per month is actually kind of getting quite close to what we would expect a first bank account to use. And so in many cases, particularly say where Singapore is kind of largely banked, people actually already do have a bank account. You know, if you look at a lot of the neobanks, they'd often be the second or third bank account that somebody would use. But we're seeing the usage being much more like a first account. In addition to that, because we're offering a debit card, we've also seen that a number of foreign domestic workers are actually using their debit cards to buy things online at websites in their home country and get things delivered to their family rather than just sending cash back. And that is kind of exactly what we really wanted to see happen, because it puts the power in the hand of the helper, that they can actually say, right, this is what I'm going to buy for my family and get it delivered to them, rather than sending the cash back and having no real control.
That's really interesting. Great early progress. So now, I mean, thinking about your experiences to date and what you know about program implementation in West Uganda and with the foreign domestic workers in Singapore, if you were adapting this for another market, is there specific research that you would carry out? Are there pivotal questions that you would need to ask? How would you reflect on adaptation? And we know that plug and play very rarely works. So how would you approach taking that to another market? And let's start with Marie again.
I think we would absolutely need to start with some more market research that was very informative for us in Uganda. And even honestly, within the context of Uganda, different districts that we expand into may require some additional market research just to make sure we understand kind of at the micro level what's going on. But we would expect to see perhaps a different kind of prioritization of goals. So I've mentioned that our clients typically are most interested in saving for livestock, education, consumer goods. That might be different elsewhere and might inform kind of our designing of savings plans for the clients. I assume, but never make assumptions, I suppose, that clients in other areas would be just as interested in individual emergency reserve funds, but we might not find the same demand for that elsewhere. So essentially, we would need to conduct the same market research that we set out with in Uganda in any other market that we decide to enter.
I think our approach is pretty much similar as well. Obviously, Singapore is quite unique in the foreign domestic worker prevalence. That's echoed, I think, in Hong Kong and perhaps the UAE as well. But as we're sort of expanding into the rest of Southeast Asia, our focus will be much more on the micro entrepreneurs, which of course are extremely sort of prevalent and a very large volume that are really underserved by the formal financial system. And so we've actually already started doing research into a number of different countries from this point of view as well, where we started really at the macro level to understand sort of the different types of entrepreneurs and where they're located, and rural versus urban, and different types of industry, and then moving down into more detail. I mean, I've kind of had quite a lot of background in about 30 plus countries over the last 20 years, a lot of which has been focused on customer-centric product design through research as well. And so this is kind of informing the approach that we're taking, which is going to be a combination of the sort of macro, but also the very much this kind of qualitative type approach that we took here that really surfaced the kind of unique issues that each group of women has.
You're on mute, Katie.
I think I would have learned by now. One thing that we often come back to, and certainly our donors and funders ask us, is the question of scale. And so, I mean, thinking about your experiences, how does this make you reflect on scale, or what it might take to achieve scale in a meaningful way? So not just women with accounts, not just onboarding, but actual meaningful usage, beyond this person cashes out or, makes a deposit once every 3 months, that this improves their life. Do either of you have comments around what, based on your knowledge now, it might take to get to some level of scale? Either or.
Go ahead, Debbie, you can go first this time.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, our approach, as I said, was to start with Singapore and then move to other countries. Our approach there is actually been that we're sitting on top of third-party banking licenses, where we're actually bringing a kind of win-win type value proposition to the bank. So obviously, as we move into different countries, it would just not be viable for us to try and get a banking license everywhere we go. And one thing, of course, you know, is that we've recognized that for a lot of mainstream banks in a lot of countries, understanding and tailoring products to and individually serving female micro entrepreneurs is not really somewhere that they want to go. But on the other hand, what they really do like is the consolidated balance sheet. And so that's the approach that we're taking when we go to other countries. But as far as the stickiness is concerned in any one particular market, it's really been very much focused on that holistic, the diagram that I showed with the 3 circles is saying, well, if we look at financial services, and one thing that we know from prior experience is that if you want a women-owned micro business to actually grow, you need to actually combine the financial services with the business building tool and the community, which really then kind of brings that stickiness, because all these things together being delivered at the same time actually will sort of deliver more value than those things provided in isolation. And so it's a combination of actually being very holistic about adding value and recognizing that the way for us to go is to actually sort of act as this third-party relationship manager to mainstream banks.
For WomenSave, I would say first, one quick note just in terms of the sustainability of our model, which I feel like does underpin to some extent our ability to scale. This being our 3rd full year of operations, we've just introduced to our pilot project clients a peer mentor who we're hoping will be able to then usher them into a more independent access to mobile money services, including the savings they've been doing to date, to continue that, and then move on to anything else they may need. And so far, it's been working quite well. These are local volunteers amongst the groups that we were already serving who have volunteered to kind of act as a point person for clients who may have a question about setting up their own savings plan or with their mobile money account. So we're hoping that will kind of be the foundation for the sustainability piece and allow our clients to continue sustainable access to financial services. In terms of scale, I think there are 2 really important points for us. One is technology. We're already kind of exploring the idea of getting a bot or something similar to automate certain parts of our products and services. So for example, those weekly SMS reminders that go out to clients to keep them on track toward their savings goals, and the congratulatory messages that serve a similar role. That is something that very much could be outsourced to a computer or a robot, and would free up our savings officers' time to then recruit and onboard new clients in the way of training and financial advisory meetings. So that improved efficiency would really kind of dramatically change our numbers and our outreach. That then is something, in addition to our results to date, that we are actively trying to make the business case to the banking partners for the mobile money services that we link up our clients with. So we, WomenSave, do not earn any revenue off of our products and services. We had experimented and done some research around willingness to pay. Ultimately, what we've realized is to reach our target market, that's not in our best interest. And clients are paying for these products and services. They're just not paying us. They're paying the mobile money provider. And the banking partner stands to gain a lot if we play out and do the math behind what would happen if we were able to reach 10,000 clients, 100,000 clients. We're talking very large sums of deposits, both current and fixed, and all the transactions that go with that. So we're trying to make that business case to the banking partner that there is a real need to reach and opportunity to reach down market here. And obviously from our perspective as WomenSave, the clients themselves have a lot to gain if they learn how to utilize that technology and make it work for them.
Thank you very much for that. Before we move on to the questions from the audience, I can see a number of really great questions coming through. Quick rapid fire response from both of you. Based on your experience of what you know now, where would you budget the most time if you were doing this again? If you were starting this from scratch, hindsight is 2020, would it be on research, would it be on design, or would it be on implementation? Or would it be sort of somewhere along that spectrum?
I guess implementation for me. Technology is the word that comes to mind, and really investing in those systems to make sure that our model is as effective and efficient as possible. So I guess that's the implementation piece.
Yeah, I think probably we've been quite balanced in all of these side of things, but I mean, because people are actually seeing Lucy as being their bank, you know, one of the things that we have been really having to focus on is to build trust. And so how do we actually do that, to actually sort of reassure people that if they're putting their money into a Lucy account, because ultimately it is a Lucy account, that money is safe with them.
Thank you. Thank you. And really interesting answers. Now, I'm going to hand it back to Sarah, who's going to go through some of the questions that you've all been sending in.
Thank you very much. I've got a tough time to try and ask as many questions as I can in the last few minutes. We've had some wonderful questions coming in. Do keep them coming. If we don't get around to answering them, hopefully we can sort of give you some answers afterwards if anyone's got specific questions. But I'm going to come to Julia's question first. And Julia's question is really interesting because obviously, you know, you both use the word very early on in your discussions, you know, giving women control, you know, giving them, you know, their choice and their ability to be able to use their money the way they want to be seen. Women's agency and choices are so often influenced by other members of their community, husbands, and often, you know, those are men. Are you working in, you know, how are you sort of adapting or using your products, or how are you bidding to influence that culture, I suppose? Debbie, I'll put that one to you first.
Yeah, well, Singapore again has kind of some interesting anomalies, one of which is that if you're here as a trailing spouse, you actually, which is predominantly female again, you can't actually get a bank account in your own name, only a joint account with that of your husband. And so one of the things that you can do actually with Lucy is have an account in your own name. And so that's kind of one area. We've also just been very much focused on the language that we use, the UI and so forth, has just made everything feel kind of very warm and welcoming, which I think, you know, you were saying very early on, sort of, you know, sort of pretty much all banking services have been designed by men and kind of for men a little bit. And we've really taken a lot of care and attention with the UI and the language and everything we use to actually feel very welcoming.
Anne-Marie?
For WomenSave, I would say we recognized early on during the design phase that the role of men in our intervention was going to be critical to our success. I think one thing that's kind of surprised us is that it, at least in the context of where we're working in Western Uganda, hasn't proved to be as much of a challenge or sticking point as we expected. Having said that, we do include husbands or men in our first financial literacy training session. We encourage our clients to invite them to participate, and that's the one where we kind of set the stage for what financial goals look like and how to define them, whether they're household level, personal, whether their needs or wants, short-term, long-term. So all of that analysis can be done, or that exercise rather can be done between the husband and wife if she so chooses, and typically the husband does participate. One interesting thing we found when we did our last kind of big data collection at the end of last year, we asked the question, we wanted to be able to report on that agency piece. And so one of the indicators that we had was who chose your goal? Was it you and your husband, or was it your husband? Predictably, no one answered my husband. However, there was a sizable component of me and my husband. And so our original interpretation was that, oh, those clients don't have as much agency to speak for themselves and to define their own goals. But upon unpacking it further with some more qualitative analysis, we found that, in fact, in some ways, the reverse was true. Those places and those instances where the clients were saying that they chose the goal with their husband, they were reporting that that this had kind of opened the door for them to have a more trusting, open relationship with their husbands surrounding household economics. And they sat down and made a decision together to save for a mattress, or for school fees or whatever it was. So it was actually quite empowering that it allowed them kind of an equal seat at the table with their husband to make these joint economic decisions together. So in our next iteration of this survey, we're going to try and figure out how to really get at this agency piece, because it's hard. It's not as simple as we initially thought it would be.
And I mean, I think any understanding and unpicking, you know, cultural dynamics, relationship dynamics is always a bit of a challenge. So we talked about it at sort of, you know, for your customers, for the women, but I also want to talk about it, and this goes back to Lydia's question, which was the first question we had in, that I think was really fascinating. So, you know, as we talked about, you know, men are often, you know, both designing the products, but also sitting as the CEO, you know, ED positions. And we've got both of you, Debbie and Maurice, on the call with us today as women in those leadership positions, right? Which I think is one of the answers to Lydia's questions. But how do we start to bring more women into, you know, and is this an answer? Is bringing more women into the design and to the senior leadership positions in finance part of the answer to some of, you know, the issues that we're talking about today? Marie, I'll come to you first on that one.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I think at all levels, having women equally represented to make decisions is critical. And for us, for WomenSave, I would say almost even more so, what's important to me is that at the ground level, that our savings officers are all women, local women with business degrees and skills who speak the local language and speak it in a way where Debbie mentioned building trust. That's obviously critical, especially with a woman who's never accessed the formal financial system, never used mobile money. It's scary. And so having a woman-to-woman service at that level, I think in some ways is almost even more important than women at the top levels of leadership for the success of our products and services. But obviously, I think both are critical. So,
thanks, Marie and Debbie.
Yeah, and you know, I think one of the statistics that I often quote is that 98% of bank management are male, and I think that is often kind of reflected in the design of products. But I also do think it's this tendency for people to design products for people like them. It's very, very difficult for people to actually see the world through other people's eyes. And so, I mean, this is something that I've done a lot of work with over the last 20 odd years as well, is kind of trying to help financial institutions to actually see the world through other people's eyes. And I think that's a key challenge as well. And I don't think it's just a case of it being female, actually. I think it's actually a case of recognizing what does the life of a female micro entrepreneur actually really look like. And it's nothing like yours, but that's what you really need to understand.
And Katie, I'm going to bring you in there. Is anything, I mean, you know, it's quite a diverse question. Anything you want to add as well from your experience? You're on mute.
Again, I mean, I will take this opportunity to plug another resource guide that FinEquity is soon launching on women in leadership, and pulling together curated resources around that. I mean, I think that I agree with, you know, really a lot of what Debbie says about the sort of, it's very hard to have empathy for people that you just, you know, that are very, you know, different from you if you're not actively engaging with them. And so, you know, I think representation is extremely important. It's not going to get us all the way there, but it certainly adds a really crucial dynamic to the conversation and brings the conversation to the fore. So that's certainly an area that we are increasingly focused on at FinEquity. So that's moving into one of our other work streams this year as well. Yeah, I will pause there.
Thank you, Katie. And I've also done a bit of a shameless plug for the Digital Frontiers course on gender equity changemakers. And the purpose of that is to look at very much what we're talking about here is about understanding how to bring institutional and systemic change And we're not just for the finance sector, but I think obviously we've got a lot of people on the call today from that, and thinking about how we bring about change, not just in the products and service office to women, but actually within the organizations and culture of digital finance and banking. As a really key thing. So if anyone's interested, Katie, I'm sure will share their resources, and you can take a look at the link that I've shared in the chat there. I don't normally like doing a shameless plug, but it fits in incredibly well with this. And as people are asking the question, part of this, right, is about finding solutions or learning more, having your eyes open to those blind spots that you didn't maybe even know that you had, like you mentioned, Debbie. So the more we can read, learn and share, the chances are that those blind spots begin to get smaller and we begin to include more, which is part of the reason we're having this webinar conversation today. I think we've got probably one more chance to pick up from an audience question. So I'm going to go to Tyler's question, which I think is quite interesting. Thinking a bit more about, I guess, sort of, infrastructure. So, do you feel like products, like your, WomenSave and Lucy are, encouraging, uptake and usage, of digital financial services, or would that be really hard to do, for example, in a country where people were not used to things like mobile money? Is there certain levels of infrastructure and certain levels of availability of digital finance or payments that are needed before products like yours could work? Debbie, I'll come to you first.
Well, I mean, Singapore, as I said, it's a bit of an anomaly, right? So we're kind of very small and densely populated with sort of 3G everywhere, and so that's quite a different scenario. But I have actually lived in Bangladesh, for example. I was there for 2 years, and there was kind of nothing there at the time on the mobile money side of things whatsoever. There was also no real 3G for most of the population. And similarly, I've kind of worked everywhere from sort of Ethiopia to Papua New Guinea, and everywhere is completely different. And I think this is the key thing as well, is kind of recognizing what restrictions or challenges there may be from a tech perspective. I mean, if you look at, let's say, bKash in Bangladesh or Wave Money in Myanmar, they kind of came in when there was absolutely nothing there. But they did have the benefit of having a recognized bank brand behind them, which kind of built the trust, and sort of overcame that kind of new thing that people have to learn. On the other side, what we're seeing is that in a country that's got sort of widespread sort of banking access, nonetheless, we're actually seeing that people just don't like their bank. And actually, I've kind of asked people, do you like your bank? And they're like, no. And do you feel your bank likes you? And they're like, absolutely not. So as I say, I think it can work in both scenarios, but it's kind of recognizing the different environments really, and then sort of solving and tailoring for that.
For WomenSave, like I mentioned at the outset, we do not invent the mobile money technology, so we very much plan to enter markets where that's already prevalent. Thankfully, there are many countries, particularly in East Africa, which is kind of the birthplace, that's already the case, and we see ourselves as connect the dots. Having said that, we do work in rural, remote areas. Connectivity can be an issue, and we are connecting populations that have never banked from their phone before. So we get some mixed reactions. There are trust components, as Debbie has alluded to. And also though, the joy that comes with a client who says, I didn't realize this phone in my hand could also be my bank account. And that feels so empowering and so secure. So kind of runs the gamut in terms of reactions, but certainly leveraging what's already there and helping these clients not just set up their accounts, but use them and make them work for them and help them meet their financial goals on their terms and conditions. This mobile money just being the vehicle, the tool to do that, is very much our objective.
And I'm going to try and sneak in one more quick question, because I can see that we've had same sort of question from two different people on the chat, from Shashi and from Abdur. And I think you mentioned it there. So one of the things, nobody really likes our bank. And maybe part of that is we don't know who our bank is. I mean, it's always someone different we see. But what I'm hearing is, Debbie, you're doing from your interface, and Marie from your, having the, one-on-one conversations. It feels like you've got a person, or a friend, and that's like an agent's network. A, how key is that? But B, and this is one specifically for you, Marie, is how do you pay those? Are they volunteers, or are you actually, what's the incentive to kind of, build those relationships and trust? I'll start with you, Marie, and then come back to you, Debbie. So Marie.
We do not pay our peer mentors, this new kind of volunteer role that we're hoping will sustain the usage of the mobile money services. We do, however, pay our savings officers, who are the kind of storefront and at the vanguard of what we do. And our kind of $1 million question looking forward, I've said, we really want to leverage technology more to improve our efficiency. But it's to toggle with this, what is the appropriate ratio of human touch to technology? How much can we outsource to technology and still get these results, still build this trust, still expect this type of uptake in usage? And we don't know. So we're hoping to continue to investigate that moving forward. I'd say right now, we're probably at the very far end of the spectrum in terms of human touch. Like, this is about as much as we could do, because it is important to be efficient so that we can scale. And so we're going to start experimenting with the pieces that we think we can easily automate, like those weekly SMS text reminders to make the deposits, but see how far we can go. And I imagine we will hit a place where we've perhaps gone too far and we need more human touch to make sure, particularly for this client segment, that we're onboarding them to the digital economy in a responsible and sustainable way. But this is our kind of next frontier of figuring out what that appropriate ratio is.
Debbie?
But yeah, and our approach really is, because we are obviously not human, we're very much tech driven, was like the challenge was, how do we make it feel human without actually being present? And so the first thing we did was call it Lucy, and rather than her bank or something. And second thing we did was, like, we wanted Lucy to have a bit of a persona. And so Lucy has a personality which is kind of a bit kick-ass and not too much into fluffy pink things. And actually, if you check out our Instagram, you'll see that we're kind of really building on this as well. And so that has kind of been a lot of our approach there. I think this has kind of really been validated. Somebody actually said to me not so long ago that when they're kind of using the Lucy app, they feel a bit like Lucy is their big sister. And that's kind of exactly how we want it to feel, is that it's the kind of, it's everything, not just the imagery and the UI, but the language that we're using on the app, but also in the conversations that we have on our customer relationship management side of things as well.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a wonderful way, and what an amazing success there, right? People thinking, feeling welcomed, wanted, and part and in control of their finances. That's exactly what we are always trying to give women. And I'm really excited that, to see further, how Lucy, how WomenSave grows and develops, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back on a webinar again to sort of tell us more about, how it's going, because, I know, you're still in that growth and expansion phase. So Debbie and Marie, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your learnings with us today. And Katie, thank you for putting together those case studies and for highlighting these things, and for the FinEquity team for encouraging us to have these kind of conversations and from learning from one another.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for everyone.
And I know we've had a lot of questions. That we will download the questions and we will try and answer some afterwards. I think there were some very specifically to Marie or some to Debbie. We will try and put you in touch with one another. And let's just keep chatting and keep connecting. We'll be sending the recording through to everybody over the next couple of days, along with the with email addresses or LinkedIn that you can reach out to our panelists, or if you've to Digital Frontiers Institute as well. So thank you so much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all in the webinar again soon. Have a wonderful day, evening, depending on where you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.